Shooting at night might seem like a challenge if you haven't tried it yet. But don't worry, there was a period in my life when I only shot at nighttime. Through trial and error, I've come up with a few methods and settings that will make your night photography much easier. Let's dive in. First, I shoot on rainy nights. I feel like a broken record recommending this in every tips and tricks video, but rainy nights is the best time to shoot photos. First, your subjects are holding umbrellas which are photogenic and creates mood in itself. I look for umbrellas that are transparent or have colors because they are more photogenic than black ones. Next, people are more worried about getting wet, so they are less aware of their surroundings, which makes it easier for you to photograph them. Lastly, rain creates puddles and wet grounds which reflect all the lights like mirrors on the ground. This creates so much more visual interest compared to dry nights. And another bonus is that they create wet window, which creates a cool image if you shoot through them. If it is a rainy night, I almost never miss my chance to go out and shoot, and you should do the same. It might give you more confidence because you feel like you don't stick out from the crowd so much. Which brings us to the next segment, blend into the environment. When I'm out shooting at night, I dress in all black to help minimize the visibility of my black camera. A black camera against a black outfit blends better into the night compared to wearing something bright like white. This might not make me invisible, but it is enough to make people less likely to notice me taking photos, which I think is important for night photography. So not carrying a large camera bag or having a smaller camera on you will also help. Then, I shoot where there is plenty of light. Light is even more crucial at night than during the day. Shooting in well-lit areas not only enhances the mood and contrast of your shots for visual interest, but it also allows you to keep the ISO lower, which results in cleaner images. Photos taken in an area without obvious light available will end up very noisy and unusable. A person in front of a well-lit store could give you good silhouette shots. A person under the streetlights can highlight them and draw attention. And well-lit streets with neon signs can give you cyberpunk or moody vibes. And people crosswalking and getting highlighted with car headlights is also a good chance to emphasize your main subject. Sometimes in dark areas, faces can light up with their smartphone, so look for opportunities like this as well. If you don't have any of those lights available, then try using a tripod and go for long exposures for a couple of seconds. But know that if you do this, you will make any moving subjects invisible in your photos. Next is underexpose. Night photography often involves extreme contrast between bright highlights and deep shadows. So it is good to underexpose your shots to protect the highlights to a degree while keeping the scene visible. You might be surprised at how much you can recover from your shadows after you underexpose. I set my exposure compensation to at least -0.7, but each situation is a bit different. I go down to even -2. Just a rule of thumb, you want your photos to be a bit darker than your final photo, not brighter. This is because with digital photography, it is easier to retrieve details from your shadows than in your highlights. So it is good practice to slightly underexpose your shots, given that you're shooting in RAW and editing in post. After everything is set up, the only thing that I keep adjusting during my photo walks is not my aperture, ISO, or shutter speed. It is my exposure compensation. So get used to practicing adjusting the exposure compensation dial as you shoot in different scenes. This may be the only segment where you need your own version of trial and error. Next, seek isolation and emotions. Nighttime streets often have fewer people, which can create opportunities for minimal or simpler compositions. Look for solitary figures under a streetlight or against an empty background. This sense of isolation can evoke strong emotions and make your photos more impactful. I don't know what it is with nighttime photos, maybe it's the automatic mood that it sets, but I feel that emotion in nighttime photography is heightened. Emotion of solitude, facial expression, or couples being close together all evoke strong emotions in the photos, so keep your eyes open to capture emotions. And I choose very busy streets for safety and atmosphere. Busy streets are my go-to locations at night. Not only are they better lit, but they also feel safer and offer many more subjects. The amount of people, cars, and lights provide many more opportunities for interesting compositions while allowing you to blend in with the crowd. This is especially advised if you don't live in a particularly safe neighborhood. It is rare, but I sometimes come across YouTubers saying that they got robbed. So you want to protect your very expensive camera gear, so stay in busy areas and stay safe. Then I position myself strategically. At night, autofocus can be slower and inaccurate. That's why I often use the fishing technique or camping. When I find a well-lit and interesting spot, I stay put, pre-focus, and wait for an interesting subject to enter my frame. This way, you rarely miss your focus. Of course, it is good if you can use back button focus and disable focusing with the shutter button. This way, you can just set up your focus and you are done. You won't have to half press the shutter while waiting for a subject. This stationary approach allows me to use a slower shutter speed because I'm not moving, all helping in keeping the ISO low for a cleaner image. And it also helps in not looking too suspicious at night taking photos if you're just stationary at one place. They will think they unintentionally got in your frame opposed to thinking that you are intentionally taking photos of them. And I also consider using a longer lens and keep some distance. At night, people tend to be more aware of their surroundings. This means getting up close with a wide-angle lens and filling up the frame can feel intrusive. So to counter this, I often use 85, 50, or even a 35. 50 has the effect of looking like a wide-angle lens if you're a few steps further away from your subject, and you can really respect other people's space with an 85. I do use 35 or 40, but I still tend to keep more distance than I do at daytime. Lenses that are not wide allows me to maintain a comfortable distance while still capturing the shots that I want. I found that if I shoot with anything wider and not get close, then I end up with too wide of a photo where I feel disconnect with my subject. I just end up with cityscape photos. There is nothing wrong with cityscape photos, but I want to capture street photos. The compression from a longer lens also isolates the subject beautifully against blurred backgrounds. And at night, bokeh balls play a real role, making it an excellent choice for low-light candid moments. Now let's get into some settings. But before that, I advise that you at least use a crop sensor camera when shooting street at night, because it will do much better than smaller sensor cameras handling low light with higher ISO. I am usually in aperture priority mode with shutter speed and ISO in semi-auto. For full-frame cameras, I usually stick to an aperture of f1.8 to f4. I think this provides a balance between letting in enough light and maintaining a manageable depth of field for sharp focus. You'd be surprised how well modern full-frame cameras handle low light and use lower ISO, so you don't need to be wide open all the time. The tiny bit higher ISO will handle everything. On crop sensor cameras, I'm a bit more conservative. I found that f2.8, give or take half a stop, works pretty good. I generally avoid shooting at f1.8 in low light because at night, autofocus tends to struggle a bit, and depth of field can be too shallow for comfort. But if you're really keeping your distance from your subject, then the shallow depth of field matters much less, so shooting wide open is a good option. This way, your camera will cut down on the ISO by a stop or two. Next is shutter speed. Setting shutter speed is crucial for night photography. If you do not set this or leave it to full auto, your camera will want to shoot at a very slow shutter speed, resulting in an unwanted blurry photo. So it is important to set minimum shutter speed when using aperture priority mode. I set my minimum shutter speed to 1/125th of a second for bare minimum speed needed for freezing motion. But if I am running and gunning, I need to raise that to 1/250th of a second. But I have found that some cameras cannot set minimum shutter speed when using aperture priority mode. In this case, instead of shooting at aperture priority mode, shoot in shutter priority mode and set your shutter speed to 1/250th of a second or 1/125th of a second, with your ISO and aperture set to auto. Anyways, here's my general guideline, provided that you are using 24 to 85mm focal length. 1/125th of a second is my default setting for general street photography at night. And 1/250th of a second is for when I'm shooting on the move or shooting fast-moving subjects. Or if there is plenty of light and I'm at a very low ISO, then I like to keep the shutter speed a bit quicker as a safety net. 1/60th of a second for slow-moving subjects or static scenes. This is generally the slowest shutter speed for normal focal length that can be handheld without a blurry image, but you do need pretty steady hands. and 1/15 of a second is for non-moving scenes where I can stabilize or use in-body image stabilization of the camera. For ISO, I set the minimum ISO at 400 or even 800, and maximum ISO at 12,800 ISO. If I'm shooting at brightly lit area, my camera rarely goes up to even 6400, so I don't worry too much about my ISO getting high. Even if it does get high on rare occasions, it is not as bad as you think, so don't worry about it. I don't set the minimum ISO too low like 100 or 200, because if I do that, the camera will want to shoot at the lowest ISO that I have set, which in turn gets my shutter speed too slow or aperture wide open or have my photo way too dark. So to gain some shutter speed, I have my lowest ISO set rather high. For the past 2.5 years of shooting night street photography extensively, I never looked at my photos and wished for less noise. It only happened once in my old neighborhood at a park where there's only one dimly lit streetlight available. With a crop sensor, I had to shoot at 5000 ISO with the lens wide open at 2.8 with the shutter speed at 1/125th of a second to freeze motion. I also had to bump up the exposure a lot in post because I shot it to match the brightness of how I saw the scene, but that turned out to be too dark. Sure, this is grainy, noisy, whatever you want to call it, but I'm very fine with this image. It is actually one of my favorites from my old neighborhood. Basically, this is how dark it has to be to really have noise in your photos. If you're shooting in brightly lit cities, you will be surprised at how low the ISO goes. If you don't live in this kind of surroundings and have minimum light available, then you will have to crank up your ISO a bit more, but don't be scared of it, you'll be fine. And you can edit those noise in post to minimize it if it bothers you. I personally don't even do this because I'm fine with some noise, but I only heard great things about denoising in post-editing. Next, I shoot in RAW for maximum flexibility. RAW files give you far more control over your final image. They retain details and shadows and highlights that might be otherwise lost in JPEG files. At night, where dynamic range can be a challenge, shooting in RAW is much more advised than shooting in JPEG files, even if you love your Fuji recipe straight out of camera JPEG files. Now back to some practical stuff. Reflections. Reflections are more pronounced and dramatic at nighttime. The dark windows become almost like mirrors when reflecting light sources. And the contrast of light and color also helps. Look for puddles, glass windows, or even shiny cars to incorporate reflections into your shots. They add depth, an extra layer of visual interest to your photos. Another thing to consider is filter or no filter. With any sort of diffusion filter, which makes your highlights have a soft blooming effect, you can create an atmosphere that is harder to achieve straight out of camera. Also, it eases the digital harshness that night photography or digital photography in general can create. However, having any sort of filter can give you ghosting effect where the reflected highlight has a ghost image that is mirrored and upside down on your photo. So if you just have a regular UV filter, consider taking it off for a more clear image without this ghosting effect. Lastly is editing. Nighttime photography gives you opportunities to edit your photos differently, because night photos are so different from daytime photos in their mood. The editing technique and style can change, and that's a gateway for a whole new genre, which is fun. So this is all I have for today. Why don't you go out on your next chance at night and apply what I've talked about and shoot some street? And I am curious, what is your relationship with nighttime photography? Are you yet to try it, or is it your favorite time to shoot? Let me know in the comment section. And if this video helped you out in any way, then please like and subscribe to my channel because it really helps out small channels like mine by pushing my content out to more viewers. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.